Welcome to Trial Talk, insights from experienced New York trial attorney Michael Joseph.
Welcome to Trial Talk, insights from legal expert Michael Joseph. I'm Sam Henniger. I'm really excited to talk to Michael today about personal injury. So to get things started, Michael, what are some of these most common personal injury cases that you handle?
The most common personal injury cases we handle are probably car accidents, construction accidents, medical malpractice accidents, and premises liability, be it trip, or slip and falls on broken sidewalks, or bad stairs, or stairs with handrail that are missing handrails, or that were constructed poorly. Another big area of cases we handle are bouncer assaults here in New York City. Bouncers can certainly be a little bit aggressive, sometimes too aggressive, and go overboard. So we do handle a lot of bar assault cases, either because the bouncers beat somebody up or because the bouncers didn't provide a safe environment. They allowed a fight to go and didn't react fast enough, and someone got hurt. Obviously, we're in Midtown Manhattan. So another major area of personal injury litigation which we handle is pedestrians hit by cars, bicyclists hit by cars, Uber accidents. We do it all.
Let's dig into the car accident side of things. What are some of the common cases? You mentioned bicyclists, but what are some other common types of car accidents?
Probably the number one common cause of car accidents is just inattentive driving or careless driving. People driving either just too fast or following too closely, or looking at their phone when they shouldn't be looking at their phone and being distracted. So really, a car accident doesn't happen unless somebody just isn't paying attention or is doing something they shouldn't be doing, whether it's not checking their blind spot before they make a lane change, or it's not looking to the right before they turn into an area where pedestrians are crossing. Those are really the most common causes of car accidents, is one person just being careless. And in personal injury law, that carelessness is usually called negligence. It's a failure to use ordinary care to prevent an accident, or violating the vehicle and traffic law, not yielding the right of way. If you're at an intersection and one car is going straight, they have the right of way. If another car tries to make the left in front of him, they've failed to yield and violated the right of way laws. So that's carelessness. That's negligence. And a lot of people either just knowing but not caring about what the laws require, or just not knowing what the laws require in terms of who has the right of way and the right to proceed. It's probably those are probably some of the biggest causes of car accidents.
Right. Again, speaking as a layman, and I think most of our listeners are as well, it seems simple enough that if you broke a certain traffic law, then that's pretty cut and dry. But you had mentioned something like ordinary care, something to that effect. And how are some of these things determined in a case that may skirt the line or not necessarily have something explicitly laid out in the law?
Well, the law really adopts common sense and experience. People who drive know how to drive. If you operate your car carefully, for example, you can't say the vehicle in front of you stops short, because if you left enough space between your vehicle and their vehicle, you're not going to hit them. If you drive at the speed limit, which in New York I think is actually just getting reduced to below 25 miles an hour, if you're driving at the speed limit, you have enough time to take evasive action, even if someone does something, like comes into your lane. Or if you check your rear view, or not your rear view, but you check your side view mirror, and you see there's a car to your right, don't change lanes. So a lot of this really is common sense.
I think most people would agree what common sense looks like. Yeah. Now, when it comes to these cases, we talk about liability. Would you mind explaining what liability is and how it's actually determined case by case?
In the car accident context, liability generally means who's responsible for the accident, who was careless, and who caused the accident. In a lot of ways, we win a lot of these cases actually on summary judgment. We're very aggressive, and in certain cases where we know we have a clear violation of the vehicle and traffic laws, we right away, as soon as the defendant files an answer, get affidavits from our client as to how the accident happened, and we make a motion to the court and say, hey, this is how the accident happened, this is what the law says, we're entitled to win. So, for example, in a rear-end collision case, the vehicle and traffic law, section 1129, requires that you keep enough space between your vehicle and the vehicle in front of you to avoid hitting the person in front of you. So in that circumstance, if it then becomes the driver's responsibility to come up with or explain a non-negligent or non-careless explanation for how the accident happened. And a lot of things like, The driver in front of me stopped short. Well, that's not really an excuse because you're supposed to leave enough space between your vehicle and the car in front of you. Oh, the road was wet. Well, you're supposed to adjust how you drive for road conditions, so that's not really an excuse. Another common example is, especially in New York City, we have rules and regulations that vehicles that are turning must yield to pedestrians that are in the crosswalk. So if you're a vehicle that's turning, you have the green light, but then the people in the crosswalk have the walk signal. So a lot of drivers in New York just didn't know or didn't appreciate that they had to yield to the pedestrians because they have a green light. So, but that's what the rules say. The rules say if you have a green light and you're turning, you have to yield to pedestrians who are in the crosswalk. So if you hit a pedestrian, it's your fault.
Let's give a for instance. If you hit somebody in the crosswalk, what happens next? Or let's say on the driver's side, but then also on the pedestrian side. What happens next, or what should happen next?
Well, what should happen next, if you're the pedestrian and you're hit by the car, obviously, if you're hurt, you're going to need medical attention. And that brings us to the next section of kind of what happens when you get hit by a car. Well, the first thing you want an accident report. You want to make sure the police respond to the scene and everything's documented. Why? Because if you just get hit by a car and the car takes off, you have no idea who they are. And there's a lot of laws and timetables that are very important in New York law for pedestrians that have been hit by a car. For example, the insurance for the car has to pay all your medical bills. And if you try submitting your medical bills to your own insurance, they may end up getting rejected because the car accident has to pay them, not the car insurance company has to pay your medical bills, not your own personal health insurance company. And New York law requires that within 30 days of getting hurt in a car accident, you have to submit a no-fault application to the correct insurance company. So how do you know who that is? Well, you need the accident report. That's why it's so important to make sure the police respond to the scene. Oftentimes, people don't necessarily appreciate how hurt they are at the scene because of adrenaline and they're in shock that they just got hit. But then all of a sudden, an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours go by and they start to feel pain. The body's natural mechanism to dull pain while you're in shock wears off, and all the pain, you start to feel all the pain you didn't know you had. So then you have to go to an emergency room, and they're going to ask you when you get to that emergency room, what's the insurance information? But you have to be able to identify who the insurance company is, and that's why getting the police report and having everything documented is so important.
Right. And let's explain the driver's side. What happens if you hit somebody? What do you do?
If you hit somebody, in New York, it's technically actually now a violation of law, a violation where you can be issued a summons and have to go to court. If you hit somebody, what you should do is notify your insurance company, let them set up a claim. That's what you've paid insurance for.
And you had mentioned in a previous episode that many of the cases you handle have to do with construction workplace injuries. So walk us through maybe one of the more common incidences that can happen at a construction site and what you do about it.
First thing you do at a construction site is if you're able to take pictures of whatever it is that caused your injury, because the second you get hurt on a construction site, the insurance companies are already working against you to try and figure out a way to avoid paying you for your injuries. So always take pictures of whatever caused your injury if you're able to. If not, have a buddy or coworker take pictures and email them to you. What happens when you get hurt at work is you're entitled to workers' compensation benefits. But what I do is what's called the labor law lawsuits. New York has a series of laws that requires a landowner and general contractor to ensure certain safety mechanisms. For example, Labor Law 240, a lot of people know it as the ladder law or the scaffold law, requires that people who are working at a height have good ladders, have safe scaffolds. So when a ladder shifts under the person's weight or it breaks or the scaffold collapses or one of the planks on the scaffold doesn't hold and collapses, the owners of the site and the general contractors are responsible for that. There's also a labor law called 241 subsection 6, which incorporates by reference the New York Industrial Code. And that really addresses almost every kind of construction accident there is. If you slip and fall, there's regulations requiring that passageways be kept clear. If you get caught or stabbed by something, sharp projections, there's regulations that prohibit that. If you're in a trench, there are certain regulations that require bracing and shoring for the trench so it doesn't collapse. If you're doing demolition and you get hit and a wall comes down on you, well, there's also shoring regulations that talk about how the walls that are being demolished should be shored and secured so that they don't collapse. If you're at a certain height, the labor law also requires that you have fall protection, like vests and lifelines and that sort of thing. So on another case, for example, if you're doing excavation, there's regulations that talk about that workers shouldn't be within the swing zone of a piece of excavation equipment. If you're lifting materials, there's requirements for what's called tag lines or lines, so that the loads don't swing and hit somebody. So no matter what kind of construction accident you have, these are just a few common examples. So no matter what kind of construction accident you have, there's almost always some kind of regulation that covers it. Everything from open holes or unsecured planks to having slip-resistant footing where you're doing work that's close to or on the water itself, like marine construction. The float stages, for example, have to have non-skid coating applied. If you're working, materials themselves have to be secured. So, for example, if you're walking by through a passageway and the wind catches a bunch of sheetrock and it falls, those should have been secured or placed just away so they're secured against movement from the wind. Really, no matter what kind of construction accident you have, there's almost always a regulation on point. Even saws, for example, saws are required to have a functional guard. And a lot of times what happens with Makitas or circular saws is that the sawdust builds up inside the machine or prevents the guard from working, and all they have to do is really take an air gun and blow it clear, and then all of a sudden the guard becomes functional again. Or a lot of employers will have the guys take the guard off just so they can work faster. But the problem is sometimes you put the machine down or put the saw down for a second, it'll continue to rotate, and it goes right across people's legs or feet. So we've had a number of cases with non-functional guards or guards that were modified by the employer, and they just continue to rotate and lacerate or cut or amputate toes. So those are some of the more common construction accidents we've seen and handled. Regardless, no matter what kind of construction accident you've had, there's always some sort of regulation that was violated.
It's good to know that there are basically regulations for every possible incident. But when somebody comes through your doors for a consultation or gets on Zoom with you, how do you go about actually building a case or understanding the story?
Well, the first thing we want is pictures. Hopefully they've taken pictures of whatever caused their accident, or they had a buddy who did so. The scene is still fresh. Sometimes if it's a large collapse or something, there may still be evidence available. We're trying to get someone out there to photograph it. So photographs nowadays are the best witnesses. Everybody is addicted to social media and their phones. If things didn't happen in high def, they almost don't believe it happened. So photographs or video evidence is always the best evidence. The next step we usually take is try to get confirmation, who was around, who may have seen what happened, are there emails or texts that went back and forth discussing the accident, and then we try to analyze, okay, which regulations apply and how were they violated. We often work with experts in the construction area to be able to show factually that if what the contractors could have done to make this work site safer and where the failures were. And the next step really is getting the person properly diagnosed, making sure that they've seen a specialist for whatever injury they have, and just getting and reviewing the medical records and making sure that everything is properly diagnosed and that we know what the injuries are, we know how it's going to affect them going down the line. We never want to settle too soon. So we know what this person's injuries are, what treatment they're going to need, and how it's going to affect them for the rest of their life.
Now, this is something I definitely wanted to hit on in this conversation. I want to hear from you. Could you explain to us what a product liability claim is and how that plays into everything?
A product liability claim is anything where the product or something you're using or something that was purchased fails. It's a very wide range of cases. It could be anything from taking a bite of a sandwich just to find that there's a dead mouse in there, or some foreign object that shouldn't be in there, or you get sick from food. Or in terms of construction, a lot of the cases we see, which are product cases, are cases where, for example, there's a failure. A part of a scaffold collapsed. There was wood that was heavily knotted that maybe shouldn't have been used as a vertical support. Or there's a structural collapse where rebar or something wasn't placed properly. Or sometimes saws themselves are defective. They're delivered defective. We've had cases where saws have literally, the blades have come off the machine and cut people because they weren't properly assembled. Other areas of product defects in terms of construction we've seen are certain I would say structural components being used in the wrong applications. For example, we've had cases where tiles that are fine when they're placed right on the ground shouldn't be used necessarily in an elevated type scenario where they're only supported on the corners. So if there's inadequate support or they tend to break when they're raised, that's obviously not an appropriate use of a product in the construction industry. So there's different types of product liabilities. You can have something that was badly made, which is manufacturer negligence, design negligence, which means it's used in the wrong application, or even warnings, where it's fine in some applications but not others, but you just don't tell someone that don't use it in this application. So, for example, we've had cases where certain pumps that are on the market weren't clearly marked or labeled that you shouldn't put gasoline through them. You can use them to pump water, which is fine, but not gasoline because if they have a tendency to ignite. So that's a warnings issue. Other cases where we've had products liability cases are in the medical field, where, for example, surgical devices, where if you have a plate that's put in to secure a fracture and the plate itself breaks, well, obviously it wasn't adequate to secure that fracture because the plate itself didn't have the strength it was supposed to have to be able to do its job. So basically where a product doesn't do its job or it acts in some way that's unforeseeable and you get hurt or someone gets hurt as a result of that, that's what a product liability case is.
And I appreciate you bringing up the medical side of things because we're going to get into a whole other conversation about medical malpractice, but maybe you could tee us up and explain just briefly what the difference is between medical malpractice and personal injury.
Well, medical malpractice is a subset of personal injury. It's an area within the broader field. So typically, one area of medical malpractice you'll see is post-injury. So a personal injury, for example, a person sustained an injury, then they went to see a doctor. Now, the doctor didn't create the injury, but if they don't treat the injury properly, that can create an affirmative worsening in the person's condition, and that's where medical malpractice comes in. So medical malpractice really is a doctor's departure from accepted standards of care that makes an underlying condition worse, or they, through negligence, don't recognize the condition and fail to take steps that the average doctor would take to halt the progression of a condition. So, for example, if you have a condition where someone comes in with a fractured arm that needs surgery to stabilize it, and they don't do that, or they don't realize it's a fracture, and then it malunites. Obviously, they didn't cause a fracture, but they made it much worse by not doing their job. So, really, where a doctor doesn't do their job and either causes a new injury or causes another condition that makes the patient's medical condition much worse than it originally was, that's really where the difference between personal injury versus medical malpractice.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation we had, and I look forward to next episode when we get to dive into that more.
Great.
This has been Trial Talk, Insights from Legal Expert with Michael Joseph. I'm Sam Henninger. Remember to like, share, subscribe, because we will continue to have great conversations just like this.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.